Okay, now I do not know how to say this in French, but I'll need to be seen out there at the plenary hall, at the lobby, and we will assist with issues of translation. Dr. Yumiko, please come. Thank you.
Asante sana, Penuel. I'm inviting the panel for this session to come to the front, please. I appreciate such beautiful chairs this morning. And this is a spirit of early learning. We have to have beautiful things and fun things. Okay, I would like to take you through very quickly this morning's menu, which is going to be very delicious. First, we have a global and regional perspectives in early learning. This is a panel discussion and plenary. And then afterwards, we have a special session, just 10 minutes, inviting Dr. Cornelius Williams, Global Chief of Protection and UNICEF, or rather Associate Director of Child Protection UNICEF, coming to talk to us about protection. And afterwards, we have two parallel sessions, one shortly after, 4 parallel sessions, and the second set comes after health break. Okay, without losing any time, I would like to start the first session, which is global and regional perspectives in early learning. We have a fabulous 4-people panel. Each of them is going to talk 10 minutes or less. You make yourself very, very popular if you're 10 minutes or less. Okay, the first presenter, panelist is Dr. Cliff Myers, ARNEC Board of Directors. ARNEC is Asia Pacific Regional Network for Early Childhood Education. Early Childhood, sorry. Okay, sir, you have 10 minutes.
I have a PowerPoint that you cannot see, and neither can I. Oh, it's coming now.
Perfect.
So, because my time is limited, I'll say that ARNEC, the Asia Pacific Regional Network on Early Childhood, is an elder sister of AfECN. We're about 10 years old. We cover the South Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific. We have about 2,500 members, about 30 partners, agencies, and we try to hold an annual conference similar to this. The one we had this year was in Kathmandu, and we're hoping that next year's conference will be in Vietnam, but that's to be confirmed. And please join us. We're always looking for fresh ideas and more partners. So I will now proceed. Uh-oh. What do I click this at? Oh, there we go. Oops, it just come. Okay, what is ARNEC? There we go. Our vision: all young children in the Asia Pacific region realize optimal well-being and development. That's our vision. We had a big process for coming up with this with our partners. And our mission is to share knowledge and advocate for children's rights and inclusive holistic ECD. So the organizers asked us to start with a slide that talked about what's the link between early learning and the nurturing care framework. Well, early learning is an outcome of all the nurturing care components. There's not the synergy between them. We can't see children learn to their full potential unless they have adequate nutrition, unless there is good health, responsive caregiving, and a secure and safe environment. I think we're also missing water and sanitation hygiene in this, WASH. Without this also, children aren't going to learn to their full potential. Key laws and policies are essential. I've been learning a lot about the new policies coming up across Africa, but they're not enough. Asia is another place with fantastic policies, ECD policies coming out all the time. But without regulation, without budgets, without enforcement, They're just collecting dust on the shelf. So I think they're important, but we can't rely on them entirely. So if we look at the principles of early learning, in our conceptual framework, early learning is from 0 to 8. 0 is a really interesting number. It came from Asia, came from India. And when does 0 really start? I'll let everyone determine that for themselves. But the period of early United States, it talks about what happens before the child even enters preschool. So at the age of 3. There's 3 different family statuses listed here when they did the research. Those families that were getting social support, welfare we call it, others from working class families, others from professional families. And they did analysis of what happens in their home within an hour of intensive observation. And you can see that in a poor welfare supported family, a child is only hearing about 600 words an hour. From a working class family, they're hearing double that. There's more conversation, there's more dialogue at the home. Professional families, it's over 3 times that. They're hearing over 2,000 words an hour. And there's differences in the quality of the words that they're hearing. From a welfare family, they're going to be hearing 5 affirmative words. Very well. Well done. Good job. They'll hear that maybe 5 times in an hour. And they'll hear 11 prohibitions. Don't do that. No. Stop. Right? And as you move up that ladder of economic development and educational status, you'll see 32 affirmative words in an hour and only 5 prohibitions. So you see, in that family environment, what is going on for that child's early learning is really different depending on that home environment. And as a faster. So this is a classic slide about the differences in IQ between the children who went to preschools, these preschools, and the children who didn't. And you can see, you can't really see, as they go from age to age, this is up to the age of 5, the differences in IQ almost disappear. But the impacts on these children's lives were tremendous. So it wasn't IQ that mattered, it was the emotional quotient. And Hackman was in, I saw a presentation by him last year, and he was saying, last month, he said, the impact of IQ on your life's outcomes is only about 3 or 4%. IQ is much overrated. It's how you deal with people, it's your self-regulation, it's your empathy, it's your communication skills. This is what matters in your life. So this idea of the downward extension of primary into the early learning programs is really a high risk because they're stressing more knowledge, more learning, more IQ. And really in the long term, that's not going to help you. How do we promote early emotional intelligence? Through responsive nurturing care at home and in the early learning centers, through appropriate stimulation, healthy, well-nourished children, safe, secure, positive reinforcement of their learning. If they're challenged, they're not always spoon-fed, but they're challenged and given feedback on how they perform, and cooperative group learning activities. These are all helping to build the emotional intelligence of young children, and these have lifelong impacts. So, lessons from Asia Pacific in the next 2 minutes. I wanted to look at governance, quality standards, and targeted inclusion. In the 0 to 2 year age group, in the Asia Pacific region, there are no champions within governments on early learning for 0 to 2 year olds. There's no champions in health. They're looking at health and nutrition. They're not looking at learning. Education says 0 to 2, that's not our mandate. Social welfare, social affairs, they don't have the budget or the resources. So no one's really looking after early learning for these 0 to 2 year olds. National coordination mechanisms, unless there's complete dedication from the top leadership, we're not seeing any real traction for the early learning of 0 to 2. And NGOs and private sector seem to be the most active, and there's big risks in that. And quality standards, there's limited measures of learning for 0 to 2 or the social emotional development. Daycare is the most unregulated, unlicensed, unprofessional organized learning. It's just everyone for themselves, at least in the Asia Pacific context. Daycare is really a high-risk environment. And parenting or caregiver education, it's not coordinated, it's not consistent. Different ministries have their own programs, different NGOs have their own programs. It's only a few countries in Asia that are really starting to take parenting education seriously and having a coordinated, really systematic approach. Home visits and nutrition, we've been hearing about the Jamaica model being expanded to more countries. That's also happening in Asia, where they're with very low-trained, low-educated volunteers going to a home once a month to talk about the young child and to support the family. And this is having a real impact. China's doing a big study on that. And I am now going to say, that's it, because my 10 minutes is up. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Sorry for being so military about it, but I think it was a very interesting, inspiring things, and we learned a lot from our sister from Asia. Next, we are going to, thank you. Please put the next presentation, technicians, is it there?
Not me, my slides.
Presentation with slides, yes.
Great.
Yeah, put the slides. Okay, let me introduce Ms. Amanda DeVicelli. She's a global lead for ECD and the program management for the Early Learning Partnership in the World Bank. And she's going to talk about early childhood finance and the financing tools. Thank you very much. You have 10 minutes.
Thanks very much. All right. Sorry, I do better when I stand. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. My task is to talk about early childhood development, finance, and costing in 10 minutes, which I think is a tall order. So rather than trying to be exhaustive, I tried to think about what do I think is the most useful information. So I'm going to focus on these 6 key messages, and these are my plans for the presentation. So the first, I'm going to talk briefly about how World Bank finance is allocated. And it's not just about World Bank finance, it's about the various processes at country level where international finance is allocated. Because even though the international development finance from the World Bank, from Global Partnership for Education, from the Global Financing Facility, they're relatively small amounts of money compared to the government budgets. The government budgets are much, much, much bigger, and ultimately those are what we need to influence. But the international budgets offer us an opportunity to influence the domestic budgets, because through those planning processes we can impact the policies that get scaled up by governments. So I am going to talk about that for a minute. Then the key points are costing is really important, and we're not doing it well enough. We don't really know how much we're spending in ECD, but we know we're not spending enough, and we won't be able to spend enough anytime soon. Probably in our lifetimes, we won't be able to spend enough money to deliver what we need. We will be able to make some improvements on the sizes of budgets going to early childhood development, but it still won't be enough. So we need to spend better, and we need to get creative. Okay, this is probably not going to be a slide you can all read given the screens, so let me try and explain it. So the way World Bank finance is allocated at the country level is every 3 years the wealthy countries in the world pledge into a big pot of money, and that money goes into the IDA, the International Development Association pot of money. That money then gets distributed to low-income countries based on a formula. The formula has to do with country population, governance, need, things like that. So let's say here in Kenya, that allocation is maybe $3 or $4 billion for the next few years, right? That's not an accurate figure, but I hope it's a roughly correct estimate. So once that happens, then the government of Kenya in this example, usually led by the Ministry of Finance, would have a discussion with the World Bank around what are the priorities for the country for the next 3 or 4 years. And those priorities are laid out in something called a country partnership framework. And that framework lays out the priorities and then guides how the investments flow. And normally that should be aligned to the overall government priorities. It's not just about how World Bank finance is used, it's about the overall priorities for the country. So it's really important that in that strategy document or other strategy document or policies, we get early childhood included in it. So once the money's allocated to the country, the government has decided their priorities. Maybe they've decided they want to put 25% to infrastructure, 25% to health, 25% to education, and 25% to poverty reduction. Then the teams in the sectors work to develop more specific plans of how we're going to allocate that money. So how much of the education money is going to go to preschool? How much of the health money is going to go to to nutrition in the first 1,000 days? And that's when the more intense sectoral discussions happen. And then once projects are agreed, the money goes from the World Bank to the government, and the government implements the projects. The bank stays involved to make sure procurement and financial procedures are followed, but the government implements the projects. And I think that's what ideally makes it so impactful and sustainable. So the key takeaways for us here in the early childhood development community are we need to influence those processes, not just the World Bank, but all of the international development planning processes. We need to know when those discussions are happening. We need to get a seat at the table. We need to do our homework a year or two in advance of when these discussions are happening. We need to think about what is the evidence we need to make our case to show that we're not spending enough in early childhood development. How can we develop programs and evaluate them to show that they're getting us a better return on the money we are spending? And how can we then use that information to make the case? Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. I think my main point is now is our moment. Resources are increasing for early childhood development. They're still not enough, but they're increasing dramatically. This figure shows you the increase in funding allocated from the World Bank to early childhood development. That is a massive growth from 2003 to 2017. And that's totally based on increase in demand from governments saying we want to spend more in this sector, or in these sectors. So cost projections, both at country level and globally, are important. I think they help us make the case. These are just statistics from our nutrition colleagues. which are saying that the scale-up of a set of nutrition interventions needed to reach the global nutrition targets would generate enormous economic benefits over the productive lives of beneficiaries in low and middle income countries. These are staggering figures. 417 billion for stunting, 110 billion for anemia, 298 billion for breastfeeding, and 25 billion for the treatment of severe wasting. These are big figures and hopefully help us make the case globally, but we also need them at the country level. Cost information can help us make better decisions at the country level, can help us decide what programs should be universal, meaning reaching the whole population, and which programs should be targeted, right? Because again, we don't have enough money, so how do we use the money that we do have in a targeted way to reach those most in need and get the biggest impact? They help us understand what are we spending our money on? What will yield the biggest returns? I'm a baker. I really like to bake. I like to eat baked goods too. So I'm going to give an example here. It's your ECD cake, right? So how will you bake it and how will you share it? So here's your budget cake. And the key question for the government is, what are you going to do with the limited funding you have? This example, I think it's I can't really see it, but I think it's early childhood education. Leaves us about 10% of the budget, even though I've said here it's 25%. And then that other circle with all of the different colors is helping you figure out, okay, with this little amount of the total budget that we have to play with that isn't paying salaries, what can we do? Do we want to spend money on construction? Do we want to spend money on quality improvements? Do we want to spend money on innovation? How do we spend our money, and how do we make sure where we're spending the money is giving us the biggest results? And I think that this process is not happening enough at the country level within sectors or across sectors. Okay. All right, so we are not spending enough. This slide shows you that, okay, sorry. We're not spending enough in education budgets. This is the Global Financing Facility prediction on the gap in funding. Right now there's a $33 billion gap in health spending, and we need to close this gap. So we don't have enough data from countries. It's hard to know what to count. I'm going to skip over this, but you'll have the slides in your package, which is telling you about the different mechanisms to raise money for early childhood and allocate it. So the questions are, how can we spend better? We need to make strategic investments and infiltrate across sectors. We need to integrate ECD across sectors through cash transfers, programs, community-based nutrition, early learning, health sector, public works. We need to find new sources of funding through public-private partnerships. We need to improve our efficiency. I talked a bit about the Early Learning Partnership yesterday. This is a program we have at the World Bank where we try to look at our whole portfolio and see where the big new projects are that we could get early childhood in. So we've granted about $10 million to more than 30 bank teams and countries. And they're small grants by World Bank standards, $50,000 to $250,000. That money is used either to develop a new quality framework, pilot a new approach, evaluate a project as it's going forward so we can fix the problem. And that money has influenced over $1 billion, right? So it's been used to create 391 million new dollars for early childhood development. It's also integrated ECD into other projects like cash transfers, and then it's improved the quality of projects. I'm going to go through these in one minute, I promise. The last point I want to make is on efficiency spending. We have a huge problem with inefficient spending. This slide is research we've done with RTI with Louise Crouch and Catherine Mercer. And it's showing the gray lines are the enrollment rates in primary education. And what you see is that there are far more children enrolled in primary education than of the right age for primary education. So kids are coming in too young, and then they're repeating.
Honorable Wilson Sochon, President of EIRLF and KNUT General Secretary. And he's going to talk about unlocking Africa's potential, the role of the early child for the workforce. Thank you very much. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I'll be able to finish in 10 minutes. The workforce is very central and fundamental, particularly when it comes to teachers. As from the trade union perspective, the Education International, that brings together all trade unions in the world with a membership of 32 million. We campaign for the standalone goal on education because we know in funding and allocation in every country, there are competing interests. And there was need in the Agenda 2030 to have education as a standalone goal. That was not enough. In the EFA goals, which expired in 2015, there's a lot of unfinished business because there was little focus and emphasis on teachers. And therefore, for us, teachers remain fundamental and central in the attainment of Sustainable Development Agenda Goal number 4. And that is why in Ichon Declaration in Korea, it was agreed that investment in teachers is central and fundamental. And for the continent of Africa, we cannot talk about ECD without focusing on quality teachers. And as EI, we have been focusing mainly in delivery of quality education through 3 things. Number 1 is quality teachers. We cannot talk of quality early childhood without talking about teachers. And number 2, teachers teaching using quality teaching and learning tools. And 3, teachers working in safe learning environments. And therefore, if you look at the SDG goals, target number 2, 4.2, is very specific about all boys and all girls attaining quality early childhood education by 2030. And therefore, when you look at Africa, it's a tall order in terms of enrollment and in terms of training of teachers. And of course, we expect teachers also to be teaching under and working under decent conditions as provided by the ILO. And that takes us back to the idea of funding. And therefore, this is a critical area of investment. Ladies and gentlemen, to unlock Africa's potential in ECD workforce, we have to commit fully to quality teacher education and improve learning outcomes, which requires strengthening inputs, processes, and evaluation of outcomes, and mechanisms to measure the processes. We have to ensure that ECD teachers and educators are empowered, adequately recruited, well-trained, professionally qualified, well-motivated, and supported within well-resourced, efficient, and effective governance systems. In this regard, NAT and Education International Africa region strongly support the implementation of the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development launched at the UNESCO World Conference in Aichi, Nagoya. In furtherance to this, it should be noted that successful implementation of ECD programs require highly accomplished, professionally trained teachers prepared to work in diverse settings and also be prepared to adapt to new teaching environments in baby care centers, baby care homes, kindergartens, and pre-kindergarten centers. African governments should develop gender-sensitive strategies to attract the best and most motivated candidates to ECD teaching. We are doing this on the basis of the analysis that ECD in Africa remains neglected and it's basically driven by private actors. And so it's important for African governments to invest in this and ensure that they are deployed where they are needed most. This includes development of policy and legislative measures to make early childhood education teaching profession attractive by improving working conditions, guaranteeing social security benefits, and ensuring that the salaries of ECD teachers and other education personnel in the subsector are at least comparable to those paid in other professions requiring similar or equivalent qualifications. If I talk about the example of Kenya, for example, Kenya has been struggling to mainstream ECD since 2005, and we expected teachers to be fully mainstreamed by 09. But that was not to be in 2010. It was not only enough to put it in the statutes, but we put it in the constitution to assign it to the county government to play this particular role. And where we are at the moment, we expect Parliament or the Senate to pass the ECD bill that will lay out the policy framework and the various raft of measures of running the ECD. Further to that, we also expect to have a working scheme of service for ECD teachers here in Kenya. At least there is a progress in this country that teacher management has shifted from communities, and it is at the county government, and we expect strong legislative measures in this. The authorities concerned should review, analyze, and improve the quality of ECD teacher training, that is both the pre-service and in-service, because continuous capacity building is also key in delivery of quality ECD teaching, and provide all ECD teachers with quality pre-service education and continuous professional development and support. More so, the concerned authorities should develop qualification frameworks for teachers, because those entering the teaching service must come in, obviously, with reasonable qualifications so that they can competently deliver quality teaching at ECD level. This also, the qualification framework is required for those entering the teacher training or the teacher trainers, the teacher supervisors and inspectors. And probably we need very strong quality assurance framework to govern the ECD so that we can guarantee quality. Authorities should develop and implement inclusive, equitable, and gender-sensitive ECD teacher management policies that cover recruitment, training, deployment, remuneration, career development, and working conditions, and improve the status of teachers and educators and the quality of teaching. So in summary, in short, a lot needs to be done to ensure that we deliver in the continent of Africa, particularly in terms of recruitment, training, paying them well, and ensuring that the working conditions are good. And this calls for affirmative funding of ECDE to achieve all this. And teacher investment is central, and therefore all countries should strive and work towards this direction. They should provide teachers with adequate technological skills to manage ICT and social networks, as well as with media literacy, and provide training on how to address challenges of pupils with special needs. More so, develop and implement effective feedback systems to support good teaching and teachers' professional development, ensuring that training has a positive impact on teachers' workforce. So in summary, as trade union movement, we believe that teacher investment is central and fundamental, and we call upon all stakeholders that we advocate towards this direction, so that as a continent, we must have a bulk of trained and qualified teachers delivering in the classroom using quality teaching and learning tools, and in that way, we'll be able to achieve SDG goal 4.2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. About the teaching force for ECD. It is, in fact, personally, it was music to my ears. We, UNESCO ICBA works for teachers from pre-primary up to university, and all of them equally important, but probably early learning is very, very important, the teaching task force. Last but not least, I'm inviting Ms. Janet Mutoni Ouko, County Executive Education and Sports for Nairobi County, and she's going to tell us about changing the story, the case of the City County of Nairobi.
Thank you very much, Madam. You have 10 minutes.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very excited today to be part of this meeting, and I want to really thank the organizers for thinking about Nairobi. I know this is an African event, but thinking about Nairobi in Kenya so that we can bring our story here and so that we can get to know what exactly are we doing and really use this moment, because I know it's a very important opportunity for Africa to rally ourselves as Kenyans on what exactly are we doing on ECD. I chose to call my presentation Changing the Story because I remember I've had a very long stint as an advocate of the right to education, and all the way from Jomtien, all the way to Dakar, and even at the expiry of the 2015 EFA goals. When I landed at the county level, where I am now taking the roles of the county executive, I found a very sad story, and this is the story of ECD in Kenya. It is a devolved function. And for so many years, I did not know that the statistics give us all the children of ECD going age in Nairobi are estimated at about 250. But as at the time I landed, the county government of Nairobi was only educating 13,000 children in our public ECD centers. If you don't think that is tragedy, I don't know what will ever be tragedy for you. That is a story of many Kenyan ECD centers. They are publicly run. So what do we mean for parents who do not have money to take their children to private institutions? Why hasn't government cared so much to expand space for publicly funded ECD centers? So much was out there, because even when I visited the 13,000 children, believe you me, this is Nairobi City County. There is an ECD center under a tree. That is how not serious governments have been with ECD. For 5 years, there was no single infrastructural development on ECD. 120 children in one classroom, 50 of them sitting on cement. That is the sad story of ECD. And I ask, the framers of our constitution, why did they leave ECD outside the bracket? We have very interesting figures of 6% funding of our GDP on education. How much is spent on ECD? We do not have the statistics. Why? Because it is a devolved function. Every county government to do whatever it pleases with ECD. And I'm here today and I know I'm speaking to the right people, because I'm advocating for a forum, like the way we sat in Jomtien, like the way we sat in Dakar, and agreed to peer review each other as nations. These are the priorities. That by this time we need to have more levies in public primary schools. Can anybody stand here and tell me that today, so many years after Jomtien, so many years after Dakar, and UN declarations, can we publicly say that ECD is free? And the answer is no. Parents are paying. But when we stand on beautiful podiums, what do we say? That ECD is the foundation. A foundation that we do not care about. A foundation that we do not have data about. So much money is being spent on ECD. What exactly? What exactly? UNESCO tells us that the biggest barrier to education is levies. But even ordinary abolition of levies cannot be done at ECD level. That is why I'm saying, in Nairobi County, we decided to change the story. And when I look back, when the governor of the county of Nairobi decided that there are going to be zero levies in Nairobi City County ECD centers, believe you me, in under 3 months, 4,720 children have come back to our schools. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. There are families that are having real discussions as to how to spend $1. That is how serious poverty is in Africa where we live. But when we sit here, those are the decisions that we do not want to make. So as I conclude, I say that Nairobi, we have led, and yes, we have the scenario like the one we had when in 2003, when the NAC government decided that let there be free education. That is where we are in Nairobi now, because so many children have come, and now we are struggling with employment of teachers. I am happy the governor will be recruiting 520 more teachers. That may not be enough, but it's a step in the right direction. And also we are investing now more on infrastructure development. But what am I saying? I am saying, can we begin at the fundamental? I know if I ask people here who was in John Tien, I will have about 40 hands here because I can see you, and you. If I ask who was in Dakar, I will have hands. Can't we make a Nairobi declaration that at least in Kenya, ECD be declared free, and let us deal with the consequences when they find us? Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I want to advocate for three things. One, that in Kenya, we have now come to Kenya. Africa, we will find you someday, I'm sorry, but can we ban ECD in Kenya? That is one of the requests that I'm making. And two, I want to ask in AfECN, and I really want to thank my friend Linet. I want to pray, can we have a forum such as this, a national forum for us, where we sit and peer review ourselves, we challenge each other. I will tell you of a county I know that have spent millions on ICT at ECD level. Why? Because we care more about tenders than we care about the impact of the programs that we are implementing. That is the truth of the matter. Can we invest more on capitation? How much do we spend per head of a child? Can our money get to the child? That is what is important. And finally, to the partners funding ECD in Kenya, who are you engaging? And I want to tell you, engaging the national government is not the solution for Kenya. Engaging the Council of Governors is the panacea for our problems. The Constitution is very clear. The responsibility of ECD squarely sits on the county governments. I salute all the first ladies who are here. Please, when I spoke to our First Lady, Her Excellency Primrose Mbuvi, about ECD, and I took her around to 2 ECD centers, the story of Nairobi changed. So we have what we need here. Let's engage them more, and our story will change. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Wow. Wow. Thank you very much, Janet. I think the panel discussion was heating now. Now, I'm going to have just 10 minutes and then asking for your questions and comments. If you introduce yourself before you, just to tell your name and where you're from, that would be great. And then if you can limit your intervention in 1 minute, we can take 3 or 4. Please raise your hand. I'll go from there. Madame, and then the gentleman here, and then the gentleman here, and I need another lady. Maybe, yes, that lady in the green. Yes, please, from here. Please pass on the microphone.
I need to take my glasses off so that I can see the mic. Good morning, my name is Susanna Duarte, I'm from Mozambique. I'm part of AfECN, but I'm in Mozambique, I work at ADPP. Thank you, big sister Anek. You've been an inspiration for all of us in Mozambique and AfECN. And thank you for sharing the Perry iScope, because the principle of iScope has to do with experience. That's the main principle. Any knowledge that you can get, emotional or cognitive, it needs, first of all, experience. And taking that as consideration, I'm going to our donors, to our government, and make a plea. We are using a lot of big words, and the point is the voices of the families and the children are not heard. For instance, we have Lusophone and Francophones here. We need to learn the language, English, to be able to communicate. But the point is, this is going this way. When is it coming back? So when are we listening to the voices of children and families? Am I talking too loud? Oh, okay. So my point is, when donors bring credits or loans or they give money, how we are spending, because if we are going to get more, and this is great news, how are we spending this money? Are we spending properly? Are the people ready not just to receive, but to actually know how to use it? In my practice, that has been a huge problem, because the time that you need to use that amount of money normally is very short for the knowledge.
Please conclude.
For the knowledge of the people that are using. So my problem here is time versus competences and the experience of the people that are using.
Okay, thank you very much. You made a point. The second question, please. The gentleman there, the back. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Boaz Dijodi, Director of Education, Kakamega County, one of the most leading counties in education and other services in serving the county. But my problem or my question goes to Sosion, Honorable Mheshimiwa Sosion, who is also our General Secretary of KNUT Kenya. The problem we have is when we talk about the teacher, the remuneration of teachers scheme of service, we go back and we are told you have a case in the court between TSC and between counties. Why don't you unlock that case in the court and allow it so that we continue, you continue to make sure that this case is removed from the court and TSC takes over the employment of the teachers. When you go to the guidelines of the policy, it talks about TSC only registration of teachers, but it doesn't talk anything more than that. Once teachers are employed and get better remuneration, you are sure of good delivery. Kindly get ahead and remove that case from the court and make sure that you sit with the COGs and discuss more about how to improve the scheme of service and implement it for the teachers in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, a lady in a green dress, please.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Doita Takona from Mount Kenya University. And first of all, the two Kenya presenters a very good job. Not that I'm discriminatory, but Jane Muthoni and Honorable William Sosion, good job for that, for those presentations. My question goes to Honorable Sosion. You've talked about the qualifications framework for ECD teachers. Who should be deciding what happens in that area? And in this framework, should it be either KICD, TSC, or the universities? Now, my other question is, I'm talking from the university perspective. We need to have a clarification as to who is teaching the children in early childhood. From my perspective, somebody with a C+, C, and C- should be the one entering a ECD classroom. It is not somebody that is below. It's not that I'm saying those ones with below qualifications do not qualify to do professional jobs, but unfortunately, my training in early childhood in the United States, somebody with a PhD qualifies to be a teacher in early childhood. And therefore, Honorable Sosion, my comment is we need to work with TSC We need to work with the county government. We need to work with everybody so that these teachers are paid a salary, a humane salary. 7,000 does not qualify for that salary for an ECD teacher. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And gentleman here? Yes. Microphone, please.
Thank you. I'm the county director in charge of early childhood education, Homa Bay County. I'm Dr. Peter Ogola. My question, or maybe a bit of information to Honorable AfECN. Please, Mheshimiwa, this recruitment and employment of teachers, when you look at the education policy, the new policy which we were taken through just on Tuesday in the same safari park, there is a function of the county government, function of the national government, and all of them is silent on teacher management or teacher recruitment. That policy should be reviewed. There is the money which is given to allocated to counties is very minimal, and if we take the recruitment of teachers to the county, while the national government, the Ministry of Education, is not employing teachers, the employment of teachers should be left to the TSC and counties just to manage the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last? Okay, this gentleman and a lady over there, and we will conclude. But you will have plenty of time to have a bilateral, so please don't worry. Microphone here, please. Okay.
Yes. I'm Nicholas Banda from Zambia, with the Ministry of Sport, Youth and Child Development. My question is directed to the lady from Kenya, my sister from Kenya. Zambia is almost taking the same route that Kenya is taking, because back home we're doing decentralization, where we're going to devolve certain functions, especially early learning, to the, in our case we call them councils, district councils, which is the equivalent of county in Kenya. Now, I wanted your advice. What are the things that should be addressed to, in order to have taken decentralization or devolving of these functions? What are the things, the first thing that should be addressed? Because from what you were saying, it looks like there are certain things that were not taken care of as we're starting the process. So what would be your advice to a nation that is almost going the same path?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have the mic. My name is Dr. Inonge Mbikustaliwanika from Zambia. I am among those people who were viewed like terrorists 4 decades, 5 decades ago for advocating for ECD. My question is to the World Bank. When you are talking about allocating so much funding to the countries, are these loans that they pay back with interest? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last question.
Thank you. Thank you. Afsal Habib from Kidogo. We're the ones that set up the model play-based classroom outside. This question is for CEC Janetuko. Congratulations, first of all, on all the work you've done in Nairobi County. ECD has really been put on the agenda. You guys have made some really significant strides. We heard from Dr. Mayers that in the Asia scenario, the area that is least invested in, least organized is 0 to 2, and particularly childcare. And you talked about 250,000 ECD-aged children in Nairobi. I think that number is actually double, because we're only talking about the 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds, not the 0 to 3-year-olds. So how do we move this conversation to talk about when early means early, and really thinking about daycares, thinking about parental education, thinking about the 0 to 3s, not just the 5s and 6s?
Thank you very much. Excellent questions and comments. I'm going to ask each panelist to respond in 1 minute. We'll start from Honorable Wilson. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I had 3 questions. One is a domestic question on a matter that the union moved the courts to seek the interpretation of the court on who actually should employ teachers. I wish to inform you that that case was disposed of and ruling given, and we have no interest in appealing. The ruling is very clear that employment of teachers shall be done by the county governments. Registration of teachers shall be done by the Teacher Service Commission, and direction is given. And so we don't have an active case in court as a union. So it should be the responsibility of the county government to appropriate enough money to employ this group of teachers in liaison with the Teacher Service Commission. So there our hands are clean. We will be demanding that county governments employ and TSC enforce the registration. Then number 2, the Kenya Qualification Framework is responsible for determining minimum standards of entry to the various training, including ECD. I think that is in public domain, that there is such a body in place, but it should do so through proper public participation so that all of us are involved. But I wish to say, in terms of attracting the best teachers to the teaching service, we've got to set proper standards, and in particular, make the teaching service attractive. Why is it that in Finland, for example, to teach in a school, you must have minimum masters, and teachers are well remunerated and well taken care of? I can see the first ladies of the counties here. If teachers are not well taken care of, well remunerated, then there is definitely no teaching. We should make teaching attractive. And then finally, the functions of the national, there's still debate. That you are suggesting that TSC takes up the employment of teachers, when in fact there is already a ruling that has come up. Unless we need another fresh discourse to discuss again, we are prepared and open to see that there is an open discussion so that we have proper assignment of roles of the national government and county government. But our view was Teacher Service Commission as an independent and constitutional commission serves the entire country. It serves both the county and national, and it can even export teachers out of the country if we have any excess. That is our interpretation. I think let us not bog ourselves in interpretation, but let's work collectively as agencies, both national, county, and all of us, so that we can midwife quality ECD program within acceptable time frame, other than engaging in arguments. Sisi hatuna case kotini, nimekuelezea. We don't have any active case in court, and I am sure in this country we have the opportunity to debate and drive a very good ECD program. Thank you.
Okay, asante sana. Next, Janet,
Yeah,
please.
you're right, and I think I think from where okay, thank you. All right, thank you. I pick from where AfECN has left in saying that county governments actively went to courts to defend their rights to recruit teachers. They won. Can they? Is it? Yeah, they should now recruit teachers because anyway they won the case to recruit the teachers and so on. And I must say that counties are so well structured. There are county public service boards that undertake, the recruitment on behalf of counties, and they liaise with the Council of Governors. We have developments of schemes of service and so on. So I think it's a well taken care of process. To my brother from Zambia, I would say that there are so many lessons that probably we cannot exhaust in a minute that we have been given. But I would say that the most immediate one is that there is opportunity in devolving the ECD section, because then you also get to benefit from the funding that is available at the devolved levels. And also, because counties or cells like the districts are closer to communities, so therefore you can be able to harness many more partnerships. And finally, I'm really sorry I didn't get your name, but the question about how early is early. I want to be honest that we're also struggling with the same because the Constitution gives us the responsibility of establishing daycare centers, but we don't know how far we could go. But of course, with the challenges of the city, we have parents requesting us to do that in as early as 1 year and so on and so forth. I want to say that we are still developing guidelines for the establishment of daycare centers, and it's still a discussion that is ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thanks. Okay, I'll start with the question on the loans. Thank you for that question. It's a very important one. You know, certainly when I was growing up, it was the big bad World Bank that was giving lots of loans to countries, sometimes perhaps irresponsibly, and the debt was way too high for countries to ever pay back. I do think the situation has changed. In low-income countries now, many of the projects are grants, which means they are never repaid. Some are what we call credits, which are like a loan, but a very low interest loan. So let me give you a very specific example. We just approved a $75 million project in Senegal at the end of September. It's an integrated early childhood project. The government has 30 years to repay that $75 million. They get a 6-year grace period where no interest is charged, and then they start the clock on those 30 years. And over the 30-year period, the total amount of interest is $1.5 million to be repaid. So that's a very good deal. You get $75 million and you have 36 years to repay it for the cost of $1.5 million. So it is very important that loans be given responsibly. There are levels for every country that you can't go above so that the debt doesn't get too big again. But it's a very important question, and it's certainly something that we struggle with as an institution and that I personally think about a lot. Just two other quick responses on the amount of time and the capacity. You're absolutely right. I think it's one of our struggles in the early childhood field. We don't necessarily have the capacity that we need to be able to absorb these sums of money and to be able to implement and show quick results. At the World Bank, that's why we've started lengthening the time of our projects. They used to be 3 or 4 years. Now they're pretty standard 5 years. And in some countries, it's a 10-year approach where you do multiple smaller projects along the way. But I think that's it. Your point is both important for the time we need to work and how long and how fast we can expect results, but also that we need to invest in capacity so that local partners, communities, and governments are able to implement these projects as they come up. And then a last point on teachers. I know that a lot of the questions were very specific to Kenya, but taking a global perspective, I think one of the things we're struggling with in this field, we have a lot of countries with workforces in early childhood that are officially termed unqualified because teachers don't meet the standards that have been set. What we see when we look at the research and we look across countries is a lot of those unqualified teachers have incredible skills and experience. We did a recent report in Tanzania where we looked at the teaching workforce and we found that even though about 50% of teachers were unqualified, when you evaluated the quality of what was happening in the classrooms, you found that it was just as good as the teachers who had the 2-year formal certification. So it's something that I think we need to think about as a community. Experience matters. Knowledge of early childhood development matters. And those two things can sometimes be more important than whether or not you have an official qualification or a master's degree. And in the context of countries not being able to afford to train enough people with master's degrees or qualifications, how do we work with the workforce we have, support them, give them some alternate certification, and move towards more formal certification eventually?
Thank you very much.
To follow up on that, I think GPE is doing a lot more of grants for countries around early childhood, early years education, and I encourage governments to explore more of that. It's a great asset, and you also don't have to pay it back. Training, I think, is a big risk because we're not differentiating the training programs for teachers of the early years versus the rest of the education workforce, the teaching workforce. Preschool teachers, grade 1, grade 2, really should have distinct, unique training that's not about how much knowledge the child can acquire, but it's more the methods, the approach, the process, which really fosters creativity that we want for our children for their entire lives. So I think there's a risk if we try to do a downward extension of training for early years teachers, the early years workforce. There's a big risk there. I think there's also a risk if we don't do training on early learning for county officials, district officials, other supervisors, the inspectorate, head teachers, if they don't understand the concepts of early learning, teachers will never be able to practice what we are preaching. We have to educate a broader workforce. Bangladesh is doing a great job of that, of offering courses, etc., extended training models for officials so that they'll be more supportive of the creative types of learning we want to see in the early years. And I'll start, last point, salaries. It's absurd to think that a preschool teacher attached to a school is paid less than a grade 1 teacher. But it happens all over Asia. Very few countries are actually having parity, and community-based teachers are paid the absolute least. And they're the ones that actually are delivering early learning to the parents families who need it the most. So how do we get more parity in the pay? It's a real challenge.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to summarize this very rich discussion. I would like you to join me in putting our hands together for wonderful presenters. Thank you very much. And then let us put another one for excellent audience and questions and comments. No, okay. We have to practice later. Okay, thank you very much. So, thank you very much. And I'm going to invite Dr. Cornelius Williams from UNICEF to tell us about UNICEF perspectives from child protection on early learning, early childhood development. Would you like to stand here? Okay. You have several minutes. Would that be okay? Here you are.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and thanks for inviting me, actually. Because in UNICEF, we have started to look at not only safety and well-being of children in the home, in the community, but we're looking at where children are learning and being stimulated. Now, one of the things actually I would like to stress is that we know that for children to thrive, they need optimal conditions at home and interaction with their parents and caregivers. And nonviolent discipline practice is important for their well-being. We know that actually a safe physical environment and close monitoring of children's activity and supervision of their behaviors and fostering their social, emotional, and cognitive competencies, including providing directions and guidance in daily life, is important. We know that actually if a child goes into a facility that provides ECD, that the facility should be safe and that the facility should be able to stimulate the child. However, are you aware that close to 300 million, 3 in 4 children aged 2 to 4 worldwide experience violent discipline by their caregivers on a regular basis? Right? 3 in 4 children worldwide on a regular basis. And I'm talking about children aged 2 to 4. This is the cohort of children you are working with and talking about. Over 250 million, around 6 in 10 are punished by physical means. We also have data that shows that 6 in 10 children aged 12 to 23 months are subject to violent discipline. This I'm talking about children 12 to 23 months, okay? Right? Are subject to violent discipline. And a similar proportion of these children, half of them physical discipline, and half of them is verbal discipline. Unfortunately, I don't have time to show you some of the films and clips that we have showing this. Now, there is another statistics that you should know about. 1 in 4 children worldwide are living, under 5, are living with a mother who suffers from intimate partner violence. You know that a woman who suffers from intimate partner violence, it affects her emotion and it affects her caregiving. Only 60 countries have legislation that fully prohibits the use of corporal punishment against children at home. that leaves over 600 million children under 5 without any legal protection. But we can do something about it. We in UNICEF have decided to join forces with UNESCO, DFID, the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, several civil society organizations, and we're calling for urgent action in 5 areas. One, in facilities and schools and communities, including ECD centers, we have to ensure that actually people speak up. We have to have a speak up culture when something is wrong. We have to change the culture in these settings, okay? And we have to reach out to the community and make sure that the community is educated why violence against children is wrong. The national and local policies, rules, and legislation that are needed to protect these children from violence, we need to ensure that we pass this national legislation. And when we talk about national legislation, I was very interested to hear colleagues talking about the government and the budget, etc. It's not one of those legislation. If there is no budget line, there is no action. You don't have the political will. It is the national legislation has to be passed. You have to have the structures. You have to have this workforce. You have to be able to reach out to the parents, and you have to have that budget line. Then we know that you're committed. You have to have better mechanism and response to prevent violence in the centers and at home. So for the centers, you have to have codes of conduct. You have to have procedures for reporting. You have to have training for your staff that is gender responsive, child friendly, and promote a safe learning environment. You have to ensure that you have counseling for these children. And in addition to that, these centers are very important. That is where you detect early detection of violence against children at home. The child that comes with a bruise on the leg, the child that comes with a broken arm, the child that is not talking and is not responsive, you are the front line. The ECD workers are the front line for children under 5 and who can pick up that this children is being abused. The other one is effective investment. We have to make sure, and I heard you talking about the investment, we have to make sure that the investment is there that supports these institutions. And then what are you doing about the data you collect? You have to have reporting mechanisms for these children. And if you collect this data, what are you doing with this data? What are you doing with the research? How much research is taking place in Africa? Do we have longitudinal research? Do we have research that is following the child abuse and what it means for this society? We know that actually in countries that suffer from violence globally, it costs billions of dollars in lost investment. And why would you invest in an ECD center, okay? And why would you invest in an ECD program? And then out of that, your investment, you're not making sure that the child is safe. And we know actually the brain science that if a child is stressed and lives in toxic stress for a long period, it affects the development of that child. So you cannot have productive citizen, right, if you are exposing your child to such stress and you're not putting in mechanism to address it. Let me stop at this point.
Okay. Please, thank you very much for Alice Cabrera. Okay, instruction is on the screen and it's not here. So there will be a slight change of the rooms. So please look at this and then go to the rooms. And I'm begging the moderators to be cutting the time so that will not be too late. Again, thank you very much for your cooperation. Have a very good rest of the morning sessions. Thank you.
your rooms again for parallel sessions. We've written them on the board. If you can go to the first slide, please, 9:15. So we have a 1-hour session now. In here will be the workforce session, focus on early learning workforce. Shopping Village, where the other sessions took place yesterday. Early learning quality improvements will be in Shopping Village 8. Enhancing communication and advocacy, Shopping Village 4. And the IHD, Institute for Human Development, that workshop will be in Shopping Village 6. Immediately following these workshops, there'll be a health break. Come back to the plenary. This is where tea will be served. Outside, not in Jumbo, outside Jumbo. And then we'll have another set of parallel sessions. Those will go until 12:45. So just since the screen, oh, your screen is working. Okay, so the next session, scaling up early learning opportunities. Savo members on this side, you're right. Innovative programs will be in Bogoria by the swimming pool. Enhancing equity, Shopping Village 8. Addressing ECD in fragile context, Shopping Village 4. Innovative financing, Shopping Village 6. And the DFID Global Challenges Workshop will be in Amboseli, which is the right side of this hall. Yeah, so we are now at 10. So let's do 1 hour. The second session we'll have to cut down. So we'll do, if we can try and do 10 to 10:45. We'll have a shorter lunch break, we'll have a shorter tea break. And if we can start up again at about 11:15 for this session, the 10:45 session, at 11:15 to 12:45. Okay, thank you. The ushers are available to direct you to your rooms. Remember, anyone doing the workforce, please stay in Jumbo.